So next speaker, Mr. Koyama Noboru-san. In the program, it's only not citing retired, but as you know, as many of you know well, he worked for a long time in the library of Cambridge University. He's veteran. So, title of his presentation: How the use of his illustrated book Ehon helped Japanese studies to develop beyond Japonaiserie. The case of Henri Joly.絵本の利用は日本研究がジャポネズリーを超えて発達するのをどのように手助けしたのか。アンリ・エル・ジョリーの場合です。じゃあ、小山さんよろしく。
Today, I would like to talk about how the use of illustrated books, Ehon, would like to help Japanese studies to develop beyond the Japonaiserie. Particularly, I would like to take up the case of Henri Joly, a Frenchman who was very active in the studies of Japanese art during the early part of the 20th century. At first, I would like to outline my presentation. These are the main items of my presentation. As for the image of Henri Joly, I could manage to find only one photograph of him. This photograph was taken by Kuwabara Yojiro in Henri Joly's study in February 1912. The image is not so clear. Henri Joly was born in France in 1876. When he was 16 to 19 years old, he studied at the École d'Arts et Métiers d'Angers, a technical school in Angers. Henri Joly worked for electric companies in Paris for a couple of years, and then he went to London when he was 22 years old. He worked for Electric Undertakings, a company of electric cars, and then he moved to another company of electric vehicles, Electromobile, and worked for the company for many years. He was an expert on batteries, and he published articles on this subject. During the World War I, he worked for a lycée in London as a part-time teacher, and he died in 1920 at the age of 44 years old. We can summarize Henri Joly's qualification as an engineer as this. He was a member of the International Electricians Society, which was a French organization. He was a Gazette, a graduate of École d'Arts et Métiers. Also, he was an associate member of the Institution of Electric Engineering, which was a British organization, and an associate of the American Institute of Electric Engineering. Henri Joly was a collector of Japanese works of art and books. After his death, his collection of Japanese art was sold at the auction house Glendining. According to its catalog, 1,895 items were sold, and the majority were tsuba, sword guards, and other sword fittings, and sagemono, such as netsuke, inro, and others. As for the book collection, Henri Joly's widow sold Western language books to Barnard College, a famous bookshop in London. According to its catalog, we can estimate over 150 items were sold. Henri Joly's widow, Florence, sold around 100 volumes of Wakosho to the British Museum at the price of £17 in 1921. The majority of those books are now kept at the British Library, but some are possessed by the British Museum. These are the books written or edited by Henri Joly. Legend in Japanese Art was his first book. He translated Arai Hakuseki's Inaba Tsuri's works with Inada Hogitaro, an art dealer from Kyoto. His last book was a list of names, Kakihan. Its Japanese title was Shousanken Shu. The Shousanken was Henri Joly's Japanese name. It means a tengu who lived on small cedar trees. These are Henri Joly's articles. Also, he was an editor of the Transactions and Proceedings of Japan Society, London. Henri Joly used Wakosho for his articles and books. For example, he referred to these Wakosho in his article in French. As for these Wakosho, we could guess that Henri Joly was inspired by Okabe Kakuya's article, Japanese Sword Guards. Next, I would like to introduce the two Japanese art experts' opinions about Henri Joly's Japanese language ability. They are Masaki Naohiko, head of Tokyo Art School, and Kuwabara Yojiro, an expert of metalworks. They met Henri Joly in London. Masaki Naohiko says, この人はフランス人でございまして、イギリスに住んでおる人でございます。この人は電気の技師であります。日本へは未だかつて来たことのない人でありますけれども、日本の言葉には精通しておる人であります。日本語の達者なことは驚くばかりの人であります。Also, Kuwabara Yojiro wrote about Henri Joly as follows. 市の書斎の棚は日本美術工芸品をもって満載し、中央テーブルの下を書籍箱とし、日本の古実書、歴史、鑑定書を充実せり、市は日本漢字混じりの文章を書き、また俳句、歌詞を作る。ことに日本創建金工品の研究においては、欧州気候の大家にて、よロンドン滞在中の親友なり。Regarding Henri Joly and Wakosho, I would like to introduce Toban Shinpin Zukan, or another title is Toban Shokan Kuketsu. It is a manuscript written by Matsumiya Kanzan. It is regarded as the first Japanese research work about tsuba, sword guards, or sword mount. Most of the book consists of illustrations of tsuba. Adolf Erik Nordenskiöld, a Swedish explorer, acquired the book in Japan in 1879, and it has been kept at the Royal Library in Stockholm. Nordenskjöld's Japanese book collection was catalogued by Leon Doroni in 1883. Henri Joly borrowed the book through a kind of interlibrary loan system from Stockholm to London and used it in London and published the article about Toban Shinpin Zukan in 1912. Returning to Henri Joly's Japanese language learning, I would like to focus on his first and major work, Legend in Japanese Art. It was published in 1908. The year 1908 was quite important for the history of automobiles. In that year, Henry Ford introduced Model T. Since then, internal combustion engines have dominated as a power sources for automobiles and they expelled electric vehicles from the industry until recently. In the introduction of Legend in Japanese Art, Henri Joly says, a special study of illustrated books helped to enlarge the scope of this notebook, opening a fascinating field of research work, which seemed to grow wider as the author's knowledge increased. According to Henri Joly, this notebook means his personal database on folklore and historical episodes in Japanese art. From this description of the introduction, we can understand Henri Joly had learned a lot about the subject of legend in Japanese art from illustrated books Ehon. Also, Henri Joly listed 182 Japanese books and 96 Western language books in the bibliography part of the legend in Japanese art. Most of these Japanese books are wakosho, and a lot of illustrated books are included. Henri Joly says, a list is given of the chief illustrated sources of information in the Japanese language, especially of those which can be consulted in the national collections. Even from the bibliography, we can find that Henri Joly used a lot of wakosho, particularly illustrated books, Ehon, for legend in Japanese art. When Legend in Japanese Art was published in 1908, it lacked an index. Partially, items of contents were arranged alphabetically, and also it contains an emblems and attributes section too. But some readers considered it inconvenient. So in 1978, 17 years after the original publication, the indexed volume of Legend in Japanese Art was published. It was titled People, Place, Things in Henri Joly's Legend in Japanese Art, an analytical index. I have used this book to analyze which Japanese illustrated books Henri Joly used for Legend in Japanese Art. This table shows illustrated books Henri Joly used for his work. He used Hokusai manga, Ehon Shahobukuro, Ehon Hokan, Butsuzozui, Ehon Kojidan, and others. As you know, illustrations of Hokusai manga may have got names and titles, but few textual explanations. The Butsuzozui, which the British Museum, now the British Library, has possessed, contains a lot of William Anderson's written notes. And this book may have got a lot of interesting issues, but in this case, I'll put it aside. So here, I would like to focus on Tachibana Morikurin's Ehon Shahobukuro, Ehon Kojidan, Ehon Tsuhoshi, and Hasegawa Tobun's Ehon Hokan. How could Henri Joly know those illustrated books Ehon? He learned from William Anderson's works. Anderson's descriptive and historical catalog of collection of Japanese and Chinese paintings in the British Museum has got bibliography parts and number 2, books containing illustrations of familiar legendary, historical and other motifs contains Ehon Shahobukuro, Ehon Hokan, Ehon Kojidan, Ehon Tsuhoshi, and others. William Anderson sold his paintings to the British Museum at the end of 1881 and sold 311 volumes of illustrated books Ehon to the British Museum in the following year. Probably most of them were registered on 27th of July, 1882. Some of them contains Anderson's written note in pencil. There are Anderson's notes on Ehon Shahobukuro, Ehon Tsuhoshi, Utai no Ehon, Morokoshi Kinmozi, and but not on Ehon Hokan and Ehon Kojidan. This slide shows the titles of Ehon, date of registrations, and presence and absence of Anderson's notes. Next, I can move actual pages of illustrated books Ehon. This is the first part of the Ehon Shaho Bukuro. The title of the page is Waka no Sanjin, Tamatsushima Myojin. Anderson's note is Sotori Hime, Tamatsushima Myojin, wife of Inkyo Tenno's sister. The title of the next page is Hidari Josanmi Kakinomoto no Hitomaro, but Anderson's notes are Yamabe no Akahito. The title of the next page is Migi Yamabe no Akahito, but Anderson's note says Kakinomoto Hitomaro died about the period Shinki Tenpei. So Anderson was confused about Kakinomoto no Hitomaro and Yamabe no Akahito, and it seems he may not have checked the actual Japanese text. In Legend in Japanese Arts, Henri Joly wrote Wakasanjin as follows. The three gods of poetry are Akabito, Hitomaru, and Sotori Hime, Shahobukuro 1. He copied Anderson's notes, but he described Akabito instead of Akahito, Sotori Hime instead of Sotori Hime. In this case, it seems Henri Joly may not have checked the original Japanese text either. This slide shows the O Shikubai no Zu in Ehon Shaho Bukuro, Volume 1. The story of illustration is derived from Shui Wakashu and O Kagami. And Anderson's note says as follows. The emperor requested to offer plum tree to a widow in near Kyoto, and she made oaths, and emperor much felt it and did not take it from her. Its plum tree named O Shikubai. On the other hand, Henri Joly's Legend in Japanese Art reports as follows. Plum tree and the Otoguis nightingale, allusion to a poem of Hakurakuten. Daimyo wanted a branch of plum tree, then in flower, but the owner of the tree, a woman, declined to break it by her reply in the form of verse, meaning, if the branch is broken, where will the Otoguis find a resting place on its return? Henri Joly described a plum tree as a branch of plum tree, Uguis as a Otoguis, and also emperor as the daimyo. How did Henri Joly get such information? Obviously, not from the text of Ehon Shahobukuro. This scene on Ehon Tsuhoshi shows that Utao Tsu in EAJRS, Udao-ji in Pinyin, in Japanese, Godoshi or Godogen, painted on the wall and disappeared into the painting. The legend of this scene, disappearance of Utao Tsu, is quite well known. Lawrence Binyan, Herbert Giles, Arthur Whaley, Walter Benjamin, and Sven Lindqvist, and others have referred to it. A lot of people have used William Anderson's description, and his information was derived from Ehon Tsuhoshi. Anderson's note about this scene is as follows. Godogen, best artist of the period, the emperor ordered him to paint in the white wall of a palace. He painted ruins and he painted out small gate and said, there is a sennin, and then the gate opened naturally, and one boy came out and be reckoning with hand. Dogen says, inside is being splendid. I shall come in head of you. please you will come afterwards, be reckoning emperor with his hand, but he could not go in. Then the gate was shut, and the Dogen never came back again. The actual text of 絵本通報誌 is as follows. ご道元は唐の世の名がなり、宮中に白壁あり、名公道元を召して山水を描かしむ。道元が曰く、この山の下に小さき洞あり、中に千人ありと指を持ってこれを打つ。忽然として門開く。傍らに道寺あって招く。道元、そうして曰く、洞のうち、甚だかなり。真公まずいらん。願わくば、陛下続いてきたりたまえ。道元、ついに洞のうちに入り、手を持って帝を招く。帝入ることあたわず、しばらくして門閉ず。道元が行くところを知らずという。The text of 絵本通報誌 is derived from 優勝 or 雄三列戦前伝。In Chinese, Yu Xiang Li Xiang Quan Swan. Edited by O Seite, Wan Shizhen. Henri Joly's explanation about this episode includes a couple of points which are not included in the original text, such as he painted behind the veil or the paint faded away. So Henri Joly likely took these from Anderson's works. The Ehon Kojidan contains the following episode about hare or rabbit which lands on wave. The actual text of this topic is as follows. うさぎは某月にしてはらみ、甲虫より紅白と言えり、8月15日夜、月明らかなる水面を走りて感じてはらむ。この世、月暗ければ来年、うさぎまれなりという。また一説にうさぎは尾の毛をねぶりてはらみ、いつ時を経て、淵より交渉図と言えり。This episode is derived from 博物誌、ボウ・ジー。The original book includes the mention that the female hare or rabbit conceives on the night of the full moon. Returning to the description of this topic in Legend in Japanese art, there is one problem. Henri Joly describes the 18th day of 8th moon in his book instead of the 15th day. He did not check the original text. Where did he get the idea of the 18th day instead of the full moon, the 15th day? This is probably because he read it in Anderson's work. At first, Anderson made a mistake and Henri Joly repeated it too. Next, I would like to move to Ehon Hokan. I would like to talk about the Ehon Hokan. The British Library possesses 4 copies of Ehon Hokan. On the other hand, the British Museum has got none of Ehon Hokan. There are 2 versions of Ehon Hokan, original Ehon Hokan and Zoho Ehon Hokan, an enlarged revised version of Ehon Hokan. Also, there are 2 types of Zoho Ehon Hokan. The one type contains the enlarged part in front of the original Ehon Hokan. I would call it type A provisionally. The other type includes the enlarged parts at the end of the original Ehon Hokan. I would call it type B. So there are 2 types of Zoho Ehon Hokan, type A and type B. The British Library possesses the original Ehon Hokan, 2 copies, and both belong to the Anderson collection. The British Library also has got 2 types of Zoho Ehon Hokan, type A and type B. Both belong to the Seaboard collection. As this slide shows, Henri Joly used type B of Zoho Ehon Hokan for his Legend in Japanese art. On the other hand, Johann Joseph Hoffmann used type A of Zoho Ehon Hokan for his Japanese teaching textbook, Japanische Studien. I guess that Hoffman might have used Zoho Ehon Hokan in the Seaboard collection, which has been kept at the British Library. I have mentioned that Andy Joly, Andy Joly's Western language books were sold to Bernard College, a famous bookshop in London. These Japanese textbooks and grammar books were included. Andy Joly had Aston's, Chamberlain's, Hoffman's, Rudolf Lange's, and Kuroda Takuma's books. As for the Kuroma Takuma's books, the College catalog mentioned that it had Andy Joly's notes in it too. The book was sold by College in 1921. 100 years later, I could manage to acquire the book through the internet. It cost around 40 euros. So now I possess this book. One of the Andy Joly's notes is about Japanese term, bijutsu. In conclusion, Andy Joly was able to learn Japanese, particularly how to read Japanese books, including Wakosho too. Probably, Ehon illustrated books had helped his learning of Japanese. Also, obviously, he encountered various problems in this endeavor, such as learning kanji, kuzushiji or social, hentai gana, kao or kakihan, and others. We can admire how he worked on tackling these challenges for the foreign students, which even native Japanese can find difficult. When Pivot's book, Element of Social, was published in 1913, he reviewed the book and he wrote, social or grass writings present difficulties almost inseparable to the foreign students. Also, he wrote as follows. If the foreign student has mastered the social using element of social, he would be able to read with ease many of the puzzles besetting him daily in the form of letters, postcards, or wood-print script of pre-Meiji days. Andy Joly mentions wood-printed scripts of pre-Meiji days, which meant wakosho themselves. Also, since Andy Joly's last book was a list of names, kakihan, and his last article was inscriptions on Japanese sword fittings, we can assume that he was struggling to master Japanese scripts until the end of his life. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Koyama-san, for this very documented presentation. So, do you have any question or comment? Not immediately. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. It was so interesting, all this digging in his very early Japanese studies. But the conclusion is one cannot rely on Joly and the early books. You can't rely on them. I suppose that's the conclusion. If there are so many mistakes.
No, just the other part. I think his book, Legend in Japanese Art, has got many mistakes. Even book reviewer, when he prepared a publication, he asked one of the Englishmen who is an expert of Japanese folklore, and then he asked him so many mistakes. So he asked, he didn't recommend, but that was because he was, his life is 44 years and very short, and he was very busy man. So I think that we must accept his mistakes. Yeah.
Another question? Comment? So I introduce our last speaker coming from Loma. Thank you, Koyama-san.